So hopefully you've created a playbook of lots of stories, some of which are funny, some of which are humbling, some of which are why you do what you do, some of the successes within your clients, within the work that you do. But the one story that is the most important story that you have absolutely dialed in, nailed down, is the story that positions you as the expert. And it's probably a culmination of a few of those stories. Because I always think that if I said to you guys, right, in 5 minutes, you get to go on stage at Wembley. Wembley Stadium is packed full of your ideal clients, and you've got to tell them the story of why you do what you do. How many of you have got it nailed down? You know exactly what you do and exactly the story that would position you as the expert. Because ultimately, it's unlikely to be the Wembley Stadium scenario, I suspect, but that opportunity could present itself at any time. And if you don't know the story of why you do what you do, that positions you as the best person to help your ideal client, and you haven't got it dialed in so that you can deliver a 2-minute version, a 10-minute version, or a 20-minute version, then you are missing a massive opportunity. This story, your expert positioning story, is the story that should tell all of your new prospects, whether it's online, whether it's in a seminar, webinar, or whether it's meeting them face to face, why you are the best person on the planet to help them with whatever it is you do. And of course, like I just said, this isn't just about the prospects and your existing clients. This is also about your team. It's about the buy-in of people wanting to potentially join your team. This story serves so many purposes, which is one of the reasons why. So the two things that were most watched on the Efficient Portfolio website, as far as I'm aware, Nitesh might give me some different stats, but as far as I'm aware, my story, my expert positioning story, which is about a 20-minute video, I think, on the website. So quite long for a corporate website video. And then also the client testimonial videos, which are much shorter. My prediction is they were the most watched or most viewed of anything on our website. And certainly the expert story that I did on there was the one that the number of people that have commented to me, I went onto your website, you told that story, it was, and that's why I came to you. It's the thing that got referenced way more than anything else. So I really want to help you make sure that you've got your expert story dialed in and understanding what good should look like. And if you've already done this previously, then this is an opportunity to rethink and kind of go again, because my story continues to evolve and I have different versions of this story depending on the audience. And I'll come back to that in due course. But what does good look like? Well, to start with, as Charlotte will tell us, because Charlotte is far more educated in the art of storytelling than I am. But there is actually, what's the story principle or theory? What's the
narrative theory?
The narrative theory. Thank you very much. So essentially, the way I was taught it, and maybe you can correct me if I go wrong here, Charlotte, but a good story really needs 3 acts. Now, the acts are often The Lion King is the one that is easiest to remember. We've probably all seen The Lion King, but the act 1 of The Lion King is about Simba and setting the scene, and Mufasa, and it's just building the scene. And then at the end and it's kind of building empathy for Simba, and all of that's going on. It sets the scene for the villain. So we know that Scar is the villain with fairly early on within Act 1 of The Lion King. But then we get, at the end of Act 1, we get the loss. We get the death of Mufasa. And then we end up going into Act 2. And within Act 2, we get the hero, which is us in our own story, but is Simba in the story of The Lion King. He gets guidance, and he gets guidance from his gurus. Now, his gurus end up being a number of different gurus, actually, because you've got Timon and Pumbaa, but then you've also got Rafiki, who's the baboon with the stick that whacks him over the head and says, don't worry, it was in the past. And at the end of Act 2, we get that realization that Simba is actually, I need to go back to become the king that I should be. And then we see at the start of Act 3, him struggle, kind of battling through that, the breakthrough, and then the hero, Simba, becoming the Lion King and defeating Scar. And really, if we look at this 3-act approach, we can apply it to almost any film that we will see, or any decent film that we will see. And I would encourage you to do that. And the next time you're watching a film, just think about, well, what was Act 1, what was Act 2, and Act 3, and who was the villain that was in Act 1? And villain doesn't have to be a person; it can be a thing or a scenario. Then it can be. Then we need Act 2, and who was the guru? Who was the person or the vehicle with which we saw the realization be generated? And then finally, how does the hero emerge, and where does the transformation come through? Where does the breakthrough come through to create the transformation? If we look at that story approach to building a story, we can build a far more compelling story that allows our audience to buy into it and be satisfied with what we tell them. So when we think about our own story, we need to do exactly that. And the best way I can try and explain the concept of the expert story is to demonstrate my own. Now, some of you will have heard this before. Some of you might not have heard it before. Some of you have heard different variations of it before. I dare say, Nitesh, you've had to listen to it a few times because given that it ended up on the website. But what I'd like you to do is, if you've heard my story before, I'd like you to think about the story in that principle of Act 1, 2, and 3, because Act 1 doesn't have to be just one scene. It can be a multitude of scenes, but think about where the loss comes. Think about who the guru is in Act 2, and think about how the transformation comes about in Act 3. So I'd like you to think about this in the sense of what I've just described, but also think about, and I'm going to ask you afterwards, what are some of the techniques that I use to deliver the story that I am about to deliver, so that you can kind of understand some of the nuances that can make a story hopefully more compelling. So I would normally start the story, if I'm doing a seminar or a webinar or something like that, that I'd normally use that transition line of, but you may be wondering, who is Charlie Redding? Where have I come from? So that's the segue that I usually use into telling my story. So here goes. So you may be wondering, who is Charlie Redding? Well, to tell you a bit more about where I've come from, I want to take you back to Kalgoorlie Bay, Western Australia in 1999. The sun's setting, and I'm sitting there drinking a glass of Cabernet Sauvignon from the Margaret River. And I'm in Western Australia, in just outside Perth, because I'm staying at the house of my Uncle Bill. Now, my Uncle Bill was this bit of a David Hasselhoff lookalike. He used to swim in Kalgoorlie Bay every morning, and he says to me, "Hey Charlie, how was your first day in Australia?" Bill, it's been incredible. That tour you took me of all those houses and castles that you've developed and sold, it's absolutely amazing. It's a million miles away from traveling in Africa that I was doing just before here, and even further away from being home on the farm. But what's confusing me is, you've obviously got this incredible business, but your house is surrounded by artifacts from all around the world. How do you have time to deal with all of that? Well, Charlie, I take 3 months of every year off to travel both to Australia and the world. 3 months, Bill? I thought when you finished schooling, you were restricted to 20 days holiday. You work for somebody else's company, Charlie. They set the rules. You work for your own company, and you set the rules. And that was like a seed that grew in me as I was traveling the rest of the world. And fast forward a year, and I'd fallen into a scene that I can only describe as being a bit like a scene from the film The Wolf of Wall Street. I'm not sure if you've seen that film. But I was in this commission-hungry sales world. And I want to take you to a Friday afternoon in that world where Bigsy, who was this big Ron Atkinson type lookalike, would be saying something along the lines of, how are you going to sell more next week? I don't care whether you're selling to your gran, your mum, or your best friend. If you guys don't sell more, you're out of here. And I remember leaving that Friday meeting, chatting to Strickers, and Strickers was this kind of the trendiest guy in the office, the only person that had orange pinstripes to his suit, albeit still with the same white shirt. Strickers, I love helping people save for their future, protect their families, do more with their money. But why is it always from Bigsy? Why is it always just about the sales? It's only ever about shoveling products down people's throats. And it just never felt comfortable. I loved helping people financially, but what I realized was I didn't like the industry I'd fallen into. And around that time, I remember getting a call from my mum, and my mum said, how's it going with the business? I'm like, yeah, it's going fine. I'm doing really well in the world of finance, but I don't really like the world of finance. And she says, Charlie, I've got some news for you. Your Uncle Bill from Perth? He took his own life last week. The guy that I held up to be the one that had it all. He had achieved everything. He'd got this perfect life. The guy that inspired me to be the entrepreneur had clearly, he'd succeeded in everything he could do with regards to achievement, but he clearly wasn't fulfilled. He clearly wasn't happy. Have you ever had a time where you knew you needed to make a decision, but you didn't really know where that was going to take you? Well, fast forward now, and I'd like to take you to 2011 and the Excel Arena, Docklands, London. And I'm surrounded by 6,000 people. And these 6,000 people are screaming, crying, yelling. The lights are dim, it's dark. Because I'm at an event called Unleash the Power Within. And this event is most famous because of its firewalk. So over the course of those 4 days, I walked across burning hot coals. But actually, it wasn't the firewalk that really changed my life over the course of that 4 days. It's what gets known as the Dickens process. So Unleash the Power Within is the most famous event by Tony Robbins, who Mark mentioned earlier on. Tony Robbins, you probably know who he is, but he's this big 6'7" guy. He's got teeth bigger than I am. And in the Dickens process, what he's trying to do is take us back 5 years and also to the decisions that we've been making, but also look forward. So out of the darkness comes Tony's booming voice of, I want you to think about what decisions have you been making over the last 5 years? What decisions are going to impact your life 20 years from now? Because it's in our moments of decision, our destiny's shaped. And once I've kind of got my head out of thinking, I think I've joined the occult, I started thinking, well, okay, what's Tony's right, because 5 years prior to that, I'd set up my own financial planning business, Efficient Portfolio, to do the best financial planning possible and to get away from all of that commission-hungry, problematic financial services industry. And it'd been going pretty well. We'd been making good money. We'd been taking on gradually better and better clients. But I started to think about the decisions I'd been making and how life was there. Because at that moment in time, I was 3 stone heavier than I am today. I was working every hour God sends. And whilst the business was doing okay, I was in the worst shape I'd ever been in my life. And Tony said something over the course of that 4 days that really got me thinking. He said, if we make the same decisions today as we made yesterday, we'll get the same results tomorrow as we got today. So what decisions are you making today that you're expecting a different result from? And what decisions could you make today that could maybe transform your life 20 years from now? So I left Unleash the Power Within with this determination to fix things, to get away from working every hour God sends, to sort my own life and health and well-being out, and to improve the business. And so primarily, where I started was creating that work-life balance. And I immediately changed everything about the way I worked. And I ended up getting very quickly to the point of taking that 3 months off that Uncle Bill had taken. And as a result, what is now 12 years later, we've created some amazing memories as a family because we've been able to travel the world together and do so much in that 3 months that I would never have got had I not decided to make that decision. I then decided I needed to take my health way more seriously and went from being 3 stone overweight and never running more than 6 miles in my life to completing multiple Ironmans, ultra marathons, and being in the best shape I possibly could be. And then from a business point of view, again, we kind of continue to try and deliver the best financial planning possible. And what that culminated into is in 2015, I had my first book published, The Dream Retirement, How to Secure Your Money and Retire Happy. And that book led on to a bit of a roller coaster of success for us as a business. I started getting featured on the radio, featured on the cover of industry magazines, in the national press, on TV. An Efficient Portfolio became known as the top financial planning firm in the Midlands. And I don't tell you that to brag. I tell you that because that's where this hard work has what that's born out of. Now, obviously, I've exited that business, but along the way, I've had 4 books published now, and I'm also the co-host or the host of the Triathlon podcast. And on my journey, I've worked out that really there's 3 key elements. If we want to master entrepreneurial happiness, having been through that journey, then what we need to do, there's 3 key areas that we need to master. And then I go on to explain blah, 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 blah. The system that is the Better Future Framework. So that is my story. It's a slightly shorter version in some places, slightly longer in other places. There's variations on it. So, for example, I only include Uncle Bill when I'm talking to people about being entrepreneurial and business ideas. Uncle Bill never featured in it when I was being the financial planner. When I was the financial planner, the piece around Bigsy and the sales piece and the commission hungry selling was way longer. So I have different versions of this story, but I want to throw the mantle out to you guys. What techniques did I use in telling that story that hopefully made it more compelling that you might have picked up on?
Always love an accent. Your Australian is on point.
Thank you. My accents are rubbish, but that is a great example of exactly. So instead of saying I did this, then I did this, then Uncle Bill did this, I used Uncle Bill to tell part of the story, didn't I? I also got Tony Robbins to tell part of the story. I used not narrative. What's the term, Charlotte?
Sorry, for what you're saying?
When I'm using their words, I'm getting them to tell the story for me in what they said, as opposed to describing it.
Just quoting them or citing?
Quoting them. That's probably what it's not quite the term I was looking for, but that's fine.
I think reported speech is what it is, but yeah.
I think you the way you did it as well, Charlie, you made it real, so it almost encourages the individual to create that picture and visualize themselves in your world at that time, experiencing it with you. Yeah, absolutely. And that's because it's really a story, isn't it? I'm telling a story. Anything else that people picked up on?
I was trying to pick out the 3 acts and the whole from your diagram earlier and the story. Would it be right in thinking that the villain was your preconception and our preconception of what a working life should be?
Well, it's a good question, actually. So the villain could be so in theory, my villain for the financial services version was always Bigsy. So Bigsy, the sales manager, was always the villain for me. But you're right. I think the concept of the financial services industry as a whole is also the villain. I think it actually, in many ways as well, the myth around Uncle Bill being the happiest, most successful person on earth is also the villain, isn't it? Because when he takes his own life, clearly he wasn't that happy. I actually forgot a part of the story. I normally loop back to Uncle Bill at the end of the story. I've just realized I forgot that bit today. But yes, that's so Act 1 for me is all up to the loss of Uncle Bill. That's the loss at the end of scene 1. It's that illusion of, that this just achieving stuff is the most successful thing. The guru in Act 2 is Tony Robbins. He's forming that transformation in me, and then the struggle through to transformation is Act 3. Anybody pick up on anything else?
Was it intentional to use almost subliminal NLP techniques to make us connect on different levels?
What, me asking you questions?
and in the point of view of using the senses so that you tap into other people's different levels of subconscious.
In what way was I using different senses? Because I'm not sure which bit you're referring to there.
So, for example, when you set the scene, you use 3 powerful emotive connectors, such as,
yes,
I'm sat at a seaside, I'm holding a drink,
I'm looking, I'm seeing this.
Yeah, exactly. So you're seeing, smelling, tasting.
Exactly. And even better if I'd got the sound of the waves crashing in.
Yeah.
So that wasn't conscious, but is something that is absolutely the right thing to do, and probably is subconscious, having done it so many times. What I thought you might have been referencing, so there's 2 things really. One is I used a question to segue from Act 1 to Act 2 and Act 2 to Act 3. And so I asked you a question, but if you noticed, it was Tony asking me a question, but I asked it so that you could also be thinking about the same thing. So what decisions could you make today that could transform your life 20 years from now, is the question that Tony was asking me. But because I'm speaking as Tony, you also get that. So that was one thing. The other thing you said, you prompted me to think of something else then, Nitesh. What did you say around, how did you ask me that question, Nitesh?
So did you intentionally use NLP techniques to make us subconsciously connect with the story?
I think that I can't remember. It prompted another thought around, but certainly you getting them to ask the questions, getting that to be the segue, and also getting them to speak. And that was it. No, that's what I was going to say. Is another thing that I wondered if you were alluding to was the analogies. So if you remember, I described Uncle Bill as being a David Hasselhoff lookalike. Big Z was the Ron Atkinson lookalike. Tony Robbins had teeth bigger than I am. Again, that's also trying to get people to really kind of feel and put themselves in that place. Descriptive words are really powerful in storytelling. Anything else?
A few bits. I'm just waiting for everyone else to say that first, though.
Go on, Charlotte.
So I think a lot of the things have been covered, but obviously you use rhetoric as well. You just alluded to it there. You've got 3 main characters other than yourself. You also, when you describe things, use a list of 3s. So a rhetorical technique there. You use an episodic structure as well. So it's not just one long story. It's almost micro stories put together in a seamless structure, so to maintain the interest and kind of avoid it becoming then
I did this, then I did this.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. It makes it far more engaging and adds more diversity there.
Just on that point, Charlotte, before you carry on, so you might have noticed that when Uncle Bill said, how was your first day in Australia, I managed to get, in my answer to that, I told you I was a farmer's son. I was traveling around the world at the time, and he'd showed me around Perth and the successful business he'd got, all in one sentence. So now, did all of that happen in one scene? Of course it didn't. Of course, basically, I mean, has any of you seen the film The Wolf of Wall Street?
Yeah.
Have you also read the book?
No, not yet.
Has anyone read the book and seen the film? Yeah.
The book's really good.
The book is brilliant. So I read the book, then watched the film, and the film is good, except you're like, well, those 3 things didn't all happen at the same time. That's 3 different stories. And you're like, well, of course it is, because otherwise it'd be a 9-hour film. So with your stories, like particularly when I tell the story of Big Z and Strickers, Strickers is actually 3 different people. I've merged 3 people into Strickers. So he's a guy called Justin, he's a guy called Nappers, and he's a guy called Strickers. And what he does, the role he performs, was actually 3 different people. But it'd be just too much to tell people that it was, then I did this with Nappers, then I did this with Strickers, then I did this with JB. So actually, you've got to use some creative license to get, you don't want to lie, but ultimately you've got to try and make it a more compelling story to listen to and tell, in the same way they do in any film.
So Charlie, without being disrespectful in any way, is there any creative license in what happened to your uncle, or is that absolutely?
No, that's absolutely true.
Because in the context of this storytelling, I mean, that is the loss, and that is, when I read the book a few weeks ago as well, that that moment where your own personal personification of what you could have in life, and it's not just that he passed away, but he took his own life. That isn't small. That's absolutely massive.
You're right.
And I've considered in my own storytelling as well. I'm slightly conscious of sounding disrespectful, and I don't mean to. I've never suffered that loss, and you've got that, and to my mind, that single factor there just transforms the whole story, because you saw from a very early age, a career, not a child, etc., but a very early age in your life, how it could be and what really mattered. And that really hit me when I read the book and found out your story for the first time.
Thank you. And no, so that's genuinely true. And I think that's why I say don't make stuff up, but just make it more compelling by bringing stories together, and telling what, because really what you're trying, I mean, some of the best storytelling I've told as an expert story has been literally 3 compact stories, but within that, they've given us so much more information. I found it really difficult to get, like, what in an ideal world, I would tell one story for Act 1, one story for Act 2, and one story for Act 3. And each one of that would contain all of those different pieces. But I've also worked out what I think needs to be in my story to position me as the expert. And that is whether I'm trying to position me as the expert in business or whether I'm trying to position myself as the expert in financial services is obviously different. So I think there's creative license in bringing different things together, but it's got to be honest and genuine, because I mean, if I said to you, no, actually Uncle Bill's totally made up, you'd be immediately just go, right, well, that's total and utter bollocks. I don't buy into anything he ever says anymore. So you've got to be honest and genuine, but you've also want to tell the story in such a way as to make it compelling to listen to, as opposed to, like Charlotte says, then I did this, then I did this, then I did this, then I did it. It just becomes really boring, doesn't it? But thank you, Steve. It's a good point.
I don't for one second ever think that you made that up or anything like that.
No.
Maybe just amalgamated maybe different parts or whatever, but obviously not. That's
no, the Uncle Bill stuff is all genuine. And I still actually don't know. I didn't know the family well at all. I only met him that time in Perth. I don't know why he took his own life. I've contemplated, because it's not a side of the family I know particularly well, I've contemplated trying to get in contact with that, but I then just feel like it's just invading their privacy for something that doesn't really, I don't think it's fair. So I've never done it. But no, that's genuinely true. Charlotte, anything you had more on your list?
I'll just do a couple of others, so you're not reading through my English literature essay here. So, and a few other things you did. You've alluded to it here with the references to films, to famous people, but also you included some known facts, so that adds gravity to what you're saying. But you also used social proof by bringing in the books, which is seeding that what you're trying to achieve. You're the expert. You've written these books. There's reviews on Amazon. People have actually consumed them. They are real life things. I think the other thing, there's glimmers of humor in it as well, which really juxtaposes that real sadness. Obviously with your Uncle Bill as one of those things, but also when you went through the Dickens process, what you felt would happen to your life if you didn't change it. And it makes those moments of sadness so much more powerful. But also I think having the humor, it stops it being all doom and gloom. It makes it far more interesting to listen to.
Yeah, exactly. So definitely humor, but you've also got to get emotional connection in there. And one final thing that I'll just throw out there is, not only did I use other people's questions, I also used their quotes. So like I said, Tony said over the course of that day, if you make the same decisions today as you made yesterday, you get the same results tomorrow as you got today. Actually, when I was doing this as a financial services piece, that's the piece I would finish with, I'd say. And I just want to remind you at the end, if you make the same decisions today as you made yesterday, you'll get the same results tomorrow as you got today. Just because what you're trying to do with that story is you're trying to get people to go, right, I know I need to do something different to yesterday. And so so using quotes within there is so quotes or questions are a really great segue from each act. And what you can also do is have a question that segues into the story at the start. So, you maybe you're wondering who Charlie Redding is. Well, let me ask you a question. Have you ever wondered whether your, living the fulfilled life that you want to live, as opposed to just ticking off the goal list. You know, you might want to start with a question, and then that summarizes the whole story. Okay, so hopefully there are some lessons there. I'm going to give you, I mean, this takes time to craft. You're never going to get this right today. But one of the other ways that you can use this structure is in the client testimonials. So if you want to line up, I'm not going to show you the video of Roger, other than I'll just show you the first few seconds of it, and hopefully you'll get the idea of how we got him to build this, how we built this talk on his behalf.
Before I came to Efficient Portfolio, my affairs and investments were being handled by another organisation. I was telephoned by my accountant.
So you'll pick up right from the start. Before I came to Efficient Portfolio, this is what life was like. Then I met Efficient Portfolio. Oh, who's the guru here? The guru is so the hero is the client. The guru is us helping the client. So before before I came to Efficient Portfolio, the villain is the crap firm that he wasn't happy with, that he's about to say to his accountants he's not happy with his current financial planner. We then come in as the guru in Act 2. This is how we change things. And then Act 3 is, and life post, meeting Efficient Portfolio with Charlie looking after my finances is way better because of this, this, and this. So you're building your client stories with this because it's going to make them far more engaging. And you do that by just asking them the right questions. You obviously edit out the asking the questions bit, and you put together one lovely story that is your clients telling the story of what the problems were before they met you, how you help resolve those problems, and how brilliant life is now that you have resolved those problems. That's your same 3 acts. And you can do it exactly the same with those client testimonials as you can do it with any storytelling. And ultimately, that applies to anything, any of these stories. And I read an article a while back that was talking about the 4 key stories that we should have. So one they described as the founder story, which is the expert story as to why I would, what I've just described. But they also said that you should have a value story, a purpose story, and a customer story. Now, I think, potentially that the expert story is maybe 3 out of 4 of those. The customer story is the Roger Kimball, the Jeremy Wood ones that I've just showed you. But you might want to just think about how those different, where you put those different stories. I mean, before I get you thinking about building your own expert story, I'd just like to kind of bring you back to one other thing that Tony Robbins talks about with regards to stories, which is we live by the stories that we tell ourselves. So it's also the stories that we tell ourselves that keep us doing the same thing or stop us doing the thing that we need to do. So we need to think about how when we build this story, how we're applying this story to our own life, because it's often the stories that we tell ourselves that restrict us the most.